All right, time to kick it with your best friends in the singing industry. You know, the mates who know some stuff, but you can still have a pint with. It's the Naked Vocalist Podcast with Chris Johnson and Steve Giles.
Welcome back, listeners. Episode 52. Back again. Steve, it's been a while.
It has been a little while, and we've gone back to basics.
Yes. Oh, I don't know. This may not go down well. If the only thing you ever did was listen on audio, no bother, not a problem. However, if you are used to the videos, sorry.
Nothing's going to change.
No, it's not, is it? And we have to be honest, though, with Steve. It's just because, sorry to the video people, but the videos by far and away are the least favorable way to take in the podcast. Literally 98% of the podcast consumed is on audio.
Yeah.
So, and the video takes bloody ages, doesn't it?
That's it. I was going to say 98% of listenership, whilst 80% of the workload to deliver 80% of the results. So we got rid of the 80%. And now we've got 78% of great stuff. I don't know.
Whatever that means. You started to get a bit vague. I don't know which percentage relates to what now.
Yeah, nor do I.
So we're in with a bang. We're in with a bang with a nerdy pair of people as our guests this week. But before Steve gives you a lowdown on what to expect, let us just fill you in on some of the things that are going to be happening this year, actually in person in terms of events. So for the people in the US, Steve and I are confirmed to be coaching at the Vocalize You Artist Intensive 2018. That is from the July the 13th to July 22nd. We've been there probably, what is it, like 3 times already?
Yeah, if not 4. Yeah.
Something like that. So we deliver a class there for the singers in the morning, but there's training for artist development, songwriting, dancing, backing vocals, private vocal lesson tuition, and there's a teacher training track as well, which is also amazingly awesome. There's Ingo Tietze is usually there with a bunch of other amazing people. So if you are keen to be in LA from July the 13th to the 22nd, then get yourself along to vocalizeyou.com/event, and you'll see the event there at the top. We are not paid to recommend you to go to this event. We're just there, and we think it's great. So there's that one. For teachers now in the UK, there is another event that we'll be at called the Vocology in Practice Voice Teacher Education Forum, which is in London, of all places. Now, this is amazing because they normally do the training in the US, but this time in London, I think it's in Chiswick in London, which is from April 19th to April 22nd. Again, Ingo Tietze is confirmed. Dr. Richard Miller, who's another crazy good researcher, is there as well. Dave Stroud, Reena Gupta, both previous guests on this show. Joshua Alamu. So many different people are confirmed to be coming over, but you can see the full list at vocologyinpractice.com/forum 2018, forum 2018. And again, not paid to speak anything like that, but no doubt, hopefully, we will see some of you at one or both of those events. So this week's episode, mate.
Yeah, mate.
What can we expect?
I would just say off the back of those 2 events, so whether you're a teacher or a singer, there is no doubt about it, you will feel a hell of a lot different when you leave because we've been there for both. You'll feel a hell of a lot different when you leave either one depending on if you're a teacher or a singer. This is why we want to tell you about it, because it is in some way life-changing, both of them, and there's no doubt about that. So if you've got the finances and the time, definitely do it. So this week's episode, though, we're talking to Gillyane and Jeremy from the Vocal Process.
Vocal Process.
Outfit. I don't know why I said
Just
it like that.
in case there's any other imposters out there.
The one and only Vocal Process. But they you can find that at vocalprocess.co.uk for more information on that. But in this episode, what we're talking about, the things that may or may not give you value, are the geekery, the vocal geekery that we go into, because they're all about that. That's for sure. And some of the things included in that are imagery in singing. If ever you've been told to place the sound in your face, put the sound forward, all that business. Is that helpful? Well, Gilliane and Jeremy are going to let you know. And also, registers, whether or not it's a good thing to ram your chest voice into your eyes. We didn't put it like that in the podcast, but all centered around the anatomy of registers and how we can best go about finding our way through the registers. We spoke about their 1-minute warm-up app that's currently on iTunes, ready to download, and a listener question about tilt.
Ooh.
Facebook forums at the moment,
Which will be there, for the enthusiasts of the still technique, or even just people who have heard that term before. It does come with quite a lot of ambiguity, doesn't it?
Hopefully that will.
They were gracious to give us some more insight into that. So perfect. Just want to also let you guys know at the end of the interview, if you're interested in taking in more of Gilliane and Jeremy's information, which they have on their website as paid webinars. They have actually offered us a 40% discount on their paid webinars. So hang in at the end of the interview in the outro when we come back, and I will give you the codes to put in to obtain that discount kindly given to us. Exclusive, that is, to Naked Vocalist listeners. Okay. So all that's left to do is just leave it to Gilliane and Jeremy to crack on. Welcome, listeners. We are here with Vocal Process, Gilliane and Jeremy. Welcome.
Thank you.
Good to have you here. We normally get an intro ready for everyone. And upon speaking to you, it would seem that your intro, purely because of all of your credentials, is extremely long. Too long for me to remember, in fact. The only section I can remember reliably is 1996, okay, which is when you guys first started teaching together.
That's right.
Although you did just tell me the first years in which you started teaching. But I won't disclose those, okay? Instead, we can start with handing it over to you guys to tell us, how have you arrived at this point?
Can we just talk about the first time that we did actually work together? Because we'd met, I think, in 95.
We've been teaching together longer than we've been in a marital relationship.
Yeah.
Right.
Yes. So the very first time we worked together, Gilliane asked me to go and play for a workshop at the Actors Centre in London. And it was literally the first thing we'd done together. And the people on the workshop came up to us afterwards and said, "How long have you been working together? It's great." And we said, "This is the very first time." And they said, "The rapport between you is extraordinary."
Was it shortly after when you got on one knee?
No.
Was that the prompter?
No,
This is it, guys.
Years,
not at all.
several
As a matter of
years.
fact, I then took him out to dinner.
Yeah.
That's what I like to see.
I thought it was a good wheeze.
But
really.
actually, we should really tell you the way that we actually met, which is Gilliane was teaching a course with somebody that I'd done a course with ages before, and I turned up unannounced, and she tried to throw me out.
Was it tried? That means that signifies a lack of success on that one.
The thing is that I'd shaved my head, I wore contact lenses, and I'd shaved my beard off, and so nobody recognised me until I spoke. And then they went, "Oh, it's Jeremy."
You look like a dodgy geezer.
Yeah, let's remove him immediately. Yeah,
wearing.
It was a bit unfortunate because it was in a place that occasionally had hobos walking in. So she thought I was a hobo.
So you blended in perfectly.
I did, yeah.
Jeremy, has a training and a long history as a collaborative pianist. And he is able to just chip in occasionally and also know when to step back if he needs to. Now, of course, the relationship that we have now is very different from that. But what happened then was that Jeremy picked up on what I was working with the student and the way I was coaching them, and he would kind of input and make a change that would make a difference. And I think that's why people saw the rapport working so well. And that is actually something that has that kind of beneficial relationship. Oh, and I want to use both hands. Dear listeners, I have only one hand at the moment.
Gillyane broke her arm, her right arm, a couple of months ago, and the plaster is due to come off in about 3 days' time.
But I mean, that interface between us is what has really continued and grown throughout our joint career.
And I think it's important because we have different backgrounds, because Gillyane trained and performed and had a career as a singer, and I trained and performed and had a career and still have a career as a collaborative pianist. So we come from very different backgrounds. Gillyane from the singer background and me from the instrumentalist and ensemble coach background and performance coach. So that together we sort of cover all bases, which is really useful. So, and also because we know each other so well, we sort of know where the thought processes are going, and either of us will do shortcuts. So if I'm working with somebody on performance and Gillyane goes, oh no, we need to do this. Or if Gillyane is doing a technical thing and I'm going, okay, so the context in which you are going to use this is that, let's go here.
Yeah, and that's with all that, and fast forward however many years it may be, webinars, workshops, books, apps, taking over the vocal world. What was it that actually made you two go, we need to go and take over the vocal world and help in this industry?
Desperation.
A mortgage.
Can we earn a living? Funnily enough, it was the decision, I think, that as a singing teacher or a vocal coach or a performance coach or somebody who works live with people, you can only work with one person at a time or one group at a time. And I did a whole load of internet marketing stuff when I was younger. And one of the big premises behind that is, can you earn money in your sleep? And the answer to that is no, not if you're doing live. But if you have resources that people can find, and then they can find out about you online, and then they can come to you and do Skype sessions or FaceTime sessions or one-to-ones or come and visit or come and do courses with us or do the webinars or whatever.
I want to say something about group teaching, because actually I got into group teaching totally by mistake. As Jeremy said, I trained as a classical singer, and I did what I think a lot of people of my generation did, was that I did a bit of teaching on the side. I did not expect to be a teacher. I got into teaching by mistake, but it was a really, really happy accident. So I was doing a little bit of preparing people for exams, the very traditional route. And I used to teach piano as well, and theory, because I do play keyboard, but nothing like as well as Jeremy does. And I was asked if I would like to go and work with actors in a drama school, because my reputation was getting around in my local area, and they thought that perhaps I'd be a good person to work with actors. So I cheerfully said yes, and I went in and met the staff. And they said to me, do you think it would be all right if you worked with small groups? And I thought, okay, well, I've been going to Feldenkrais sessions in small groups and we all work together quite nicely. So, yeah, I'll give it a go. First class, 20 people. And what was the song I took? I took Cole Porter's In the Still of the Night. Now, if you know the published key in that, it goes up to F5. Granted, the boys were singing an octave lower.
That's an octave and a half above.
Yeah, so 2/3 of them said, we can't sing that note. That's too high. Now, this was a real baptism of fire for me, because I had worked as a leader singer and an early music singer. And I said for years and years, well, everybody has an F after that experience. But working with that in that group situation, I had to completely turn around the way that I communicated concepts about the voice, because you work with 20 actors in a room and most of them are scared witless of singing, and you have to find a way to reach them. And actors are very forthcoming, because if you talk rubbish, they'll hear it and they'll feed it back to you.
I think this is really interesting. There's the group of people there that are very skilled with spoken voice. any actor, any professional actor is skilled with spoken voice, and yet they can feel desperately unskilled with singing voice. And I think that's really fascinating, because we do use the same instrument, we use the same things, but there are things about singing that are more extended, more exposing. The whole business of the fact that you extend sound when you sing, which you don't tend to when you speak, means that the actual timbre, the actual tone of voice that you use becomes far more important. And also genre. You know, the moment you're in classical, beauty of tone is everything, and legato and smooth singing is everything. And the moment you go into musical theatre, story is everything, and you happen to be singing on pitch. The moment you go into R&B, riffs are everything, so notes. All these genres have different requirements, and I don't know that you get that in the speaking voice training.
It's more than that, though, because an actor is always motivated by text and psychology and intention and purpose. And so the idea that they have to, say, produce a particular kind of sound quality is just an anathema to them. So you have to find a way of helping them find that affect or that emotion, often in speaking voice. A lot of what we do, so we will get people to whinge and moan and go, oh, I'm so fed up, or now I'm going into a really soothing kind of voice, and how would I use that? And then eliciting that in singing voice, which is very helpful. I just want to backtrack a bit about the whole thing about working with groups, though, because the traditional way of learning singing, as you guys know, is one-to-one, where the teacher tells you whether what you're doing is right or wrong, and the teacher does interventions to improve your voice. You can't work in that way with a group. So you have to learn to explain concepts about voice in a very digestible way. And you also have to create stepped exercises and stepped processes that a whole group can do. That will make a change. And that was what I learned from doing that. And I also, coincidentally, did a lot of cross-referring with my voice colleagues. So I would go and sit in on their lessons. I worked with Andrew Wade, who was head of the voice at the Royal Shakespeare Company for many years. So this was early in his career. And he used to sit in on my lessons, and we sat and we talked and we got together. And what I realised was a voice and speech teacher actually has a process. The average singing teacher in my day did not. It was, you make this sound, this is the sound I'm looking for. There wasn't a real sort of, like I said, a stepped process, not really cognition of what the process was. That really changed my teaching, and I think it was that really helped us when we started to work with groups. And I think you really learned from that group thing with me as well.
Because as a pianist, I had, American audience, as a pianist, I'm just going to digress for a moment, because when we were working in Israel, Gillyane introduced me as, this is Jeremy, he's my husband, and he's a great pianist.
No, he's a fabulous pianist.
And the whole Israeli ladies in the audience just raised eyebrows and laughed. And it's the difference in pronunciation between pianist and pianist.
And we leave the rest to you.
Yeah, absolutely.
So,
learn that lesson.
Yeah. I think as a collaborative pianist, I'm usually working with one person at a time, and I'm also coaching one person at a time. And if I'm coaching an ensemble, I won't be playing. So I'm not involved at all. And I think it was the idea of teaching technique to groups was quite a revelation for me.
And so with all of those mixtures of genres, abilities, psychological limitations, here's a can of worms, do you have an approach? And if so, what is that when you go to teach the groups? Is it like a universal?
I would say the thing that really excites me as a trainer is the function of the voice. You know, I went back to university at the age of 50 to do a doctorate with voice science content, because I realised that although I was doing very well in my career and I had good recognition because of, you know, my published works and the places where I'd worked, that there were too many unanswered questions for me, and I wanted to find out those answers. I didn't want to be at the top of the tree waiting for younger people to come up and feeling I regret to say I've seen this happen so often in our profession, feeling that I had to keep those people down. I didn't want to do that. That's why I went to do my doctorate. And the doctorate really embedded for me knowledge of vocal function. So for me, it's about what's going on in the mechanics. And I am going to mention here that what probably set me off on that journey back in the early 1990s was coming across the Estill stuff, which came to the UK in 1991. And I went into it because I didn't know how to teach my students to belt. And people were needing to belt at that point in time. And I had students who could, and I didn't know what they were doing. So it was very useful from that point of view. And of course, Joe Estill talked about function of voice. Some of those things now are outmoded and need updating. But nevertheless, for us in the UK, that was quite a turning point to actually have someone who was a singer talk about function of the voice rather than what the Swedes rather nicely call the flower language. You know,
I've not heard of that. You're going to have to expand on that.
Yes,
for us.
they call it flower language, so it's all about imagery.
Think of that you're singing like a pink fluffy cloud.
Yeah.
Sure.
So for a long time, I think because of that influence, I didn't use imagery, but now I do, because anything that elicits the change in the student, that makes sense to the student, is something that you want to use. And I think what helps as someone who understands the mechanics of the voice is that you can create an image with that student that is meaningful, but also not too far away. For example, an image that wouldn't work would be to say, put your voice forward. So a student who took that very literally would think about putting their voice forward. And I have had students who've slavishly followed that instruction working with a different teacher, and I've seen the larynx pushed up and forward in an attempt to go forward. And also
the furthest forward point on your face is the tip of your nose. So you're highly likely, if you're going to follow that literally, to sing down your nose.
Mm-hmm. Or with a jutted chin or something to reach forward in any case, or on the tiptoes leaning that way.
Yeah, I've seen all of those.
Yes.
So I think traditionally what happened with singing teaching was that it was about the output. You listened to the output and you hoped you knew how to create a different input to change that output. But the instruction that you gave was normally about output. It needs to be more forward. So a more forward bright sound is an example of output. For instance, it might have more resonance in the upper harmonics. But you don't achieve that output by putting your voice forward.
Listening to an output, you're listening to a sound, and you're going, that's the sound I want, and the sound that I want is forwards. Therefore, I want you to bring the sound forward. So you're using the output as an instruction to create it. But the output is a result of doing something else. You're not giving them instruction to do that thing, you're giving them instruction to give that output, and that may or may not work. Yes. More likely it won't work. Yeah. So then you have students who are struggling to do what you want them to do, but not knowing how to.
Absolutely. And I think a lot of our listeners, we see it on the forums, on our group, people sending questions in. How do I achieve a more forward tone, or placement is the word often used. So I think it's really important for people out there to kind of like start exploring that notion of output and input. Which one could I reliably go for to get the result I want? And chances are it's very seldom the output.
Can I give you an example of forward-backward?
Yes.
The sound, I need to bring my sound more forward. The first place I go when I hear somebody saying that is, what is the back of your tongue doing? Because it's likely, if you have a backed sound, and I'm using inverted commas there, if you have a backed sound, it's likely that the back of your tongue is low. And therefore, the biggest resonating space that you're making is at the back of your mouth and down. The moment you bring the back of your tongue up slightly, the sound will move forwards. That's a result of doing something specific.
Absolutely. And so what would be your guys' go-to instruction for that?
For fixing that, probably playing around with the more forward vowels and comparing them with the back vowels. I mean, you might need to change tongue position generally and raise awareness of tongue position. But, you know, just as Jeremy said, a higher backed tongue and a more fronted tongue is going to raise the second formant, and therefore we're going to have a perceptually brighter sound. Now, I probably would not use the F word at all with my clients, unless it was someone who knew about harmonics, and I might say, oh, here you've got brighter harmonics. But so you might need to do quite a bit of unpicking of tongue positions. And also the other thing that you talk about a lot, Jeremy, and I've taken it from you, which is what's the instruction the student is holding in their head. So if the student holds a belief from either a singing teacher or their own perception of how sound is made, that
finding it on the internet,
they must make a bigger space inside their voice. And of course, one of the tangible ways we can do that is by yawning. If they're holding that instruction, of course they're not going to be able to change their tongue position, because that overriding instruction is being held.
Half of our lessons are working out what the overriding instruction is that someone's already holding and deciding whether it's appropriate or not.
I think that's a really interesting part of the singing teacher journey, because I can recall many moments of where a student would say something and I'm like, that's why we can't get here for the last 3 months. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
You learn that lesson sort of several times, and then you start being a little bit more questioning of like, why isn't this going there? Like, let's talk about like what you've heard, what you've read, what you're thinking about. And then that's when we can change from like technique solves everything to digging deep in the mind at those beliefs, like you said. Yeah.
Well, exactly, and it goes back to your point about whether. Well, I can't remember if you said this before we started recording or after, but about the understanding of the student, of the singer, and the application of technique. And when we start off learning, a lot of us will have a technique to teach, and that's how, as a teacher, that's really comforting, because we've got a method and structure, but then everyone gets it. Everyone is applied with this one thing,
my magical potion.
And as you say, the more you go on, the more you understand that it's almost worthless if there isn't an understanding, an empathy for the situation that the human being is in on the other side, because one, they may not need it, and secondly, they definitely may not understand it. So that's really interesting. So with all that said, has there been, over the years, any significant revelations for you guys?
I've got one. Okay. We were in the voice clinic in Edinburgh, and this is many years ago. And we were looking at voice analysis, and we were listening to recordings, and we were looking at all sorts of things. And I had one of those extraordinary moments where it was like that you see on television, where the whole of the background blurs and you focus in on one thing. And I suddenly went, oh, I can hear the vocal folds. I can actually get away from all the resonance stuff that's going on, and I can go down and I can actually hear what the vocal folds are doing. That's bizarre. And it is bizarre, because you go, okay, I know that you're using an OR vowel to create resonance. I know that the back of your tongue is slightly low. I know that you're in a medium thick vocal fold here. But I can actually hear what sound is being made. Not the actual sound that's going down on there, because it would just be... That's fine. But I'm hearing what's going on without all the resonating stuff. And that was an extraordinary moment, because I thought, if I can do that, then I can start analysing much more accurately what people are doing.
And then diagnosing much quicker.
Much quicker.
Interesting.
Because you start then to break things down. You start to go, is this a resonating thing? Is it a belief thing? Is it a vocal fold thing? What's the airflow doing? What are the vocal folds doing with the airflow? What's getting the airflow up to the vocal folds? How is that working? How much is it? How much is leaking? And so on and so on. And it was one of those domino things where I just went, that happens, and now I can do all of this.
Very interesting. And you, Gilliane, what about you?
Do you know, I'm much more of a slow burn kind of gal, so it didn't happen like that for me. I think one thing which I spoke about earlier, which was that I realised that my voice and speech colleagues had a process and I didn't. And then sort of later on, it was when I was working with individuals after I'd, worked as an Estil trainer, and I'd written my first book. I continually found that female singers were coming in and talking about a middle register, or this feels like a mix. There we use the M word, or this feels like a mix.
Oh God, this is supposed to be an hour.
Let's stop this. Stop this recording right now. Abort.
Hey, let's talk mix.
It's actually the reason why I went to do a PhD. And what I noticed was that they were always referring to this. Now, as having been a trained soprano, classical soprano, of course I didn't use my chest voice very much because it's a bit of a no-no, you're not really meant to.
Can I just say she didn't use it at all?
Thank you for that. Except when I spoke, but because it wasn't allowed. You didn't even use it in warm-ups. You did not go there. And then, because of having gone through the Estill journey, registers simply aren't mentioned or referred to, and they certainly weren't when I did it. And then I was coming across these girls, particularly the women, were talking about it. But now I've got this place in the middle. It feels like a mix. It feels like something's happening there. And I would work with them. And I noticed that there seemed to be lots of different versions of what people did in that middle range. And I thought, well, that's quite interesting. So I learned from my students, because it is always a two-way process, teaching, isn't it? And it was really that set me off to do the PhD. And I started to think and read everything I could about register theory. And it was a massive realisation for me to realise that the stuff I'd learned from Estill could be mapped on vocal registers and should be mapped on vocal registers, and that learning that vocal registers are patterns of vibration, that was a really big thing for me. Talking of the slow burn, sometime during my work on reading about registers, I came across the research that was done in the Bell telephone laboratories in 1944, where they did sort of a high-speed photography, and they were looking, it must have been at male voice, and I think you can still get copies of this, and what they noticed was that there was a different pattern of vibration between falsetto and modal. And I went, oh, different pattern of vibration. Wow. If we're thinking about what's happening at vocal fold level, this is critical. Mm-hmm. And I can tell you that over the last 20 years that we've been working together, we have had to change our thinking over and over again, reviewing and revising how we teach something like, the outcome of a particular voice quality, which is very useful when you're working with actors, because they have to produce different sorts of sounds, not just one load of sounds, one type of sound. And being able to map the registers underneath the sound output was really, really important, and it's changed the way that I teach. And unfortunately, it makes it slightly more difficult and complicated, and less simplistic, and I had to go with it.
I don't actually know that I agree with that, because what was interesting for me, the whole business of...
That's because you're a man.
Well, yeah, I mean... Okay.
And you're married as well. I've got to slip that one, and you guys are allowed to do this.
Partly it's because I'm a man, because in the male voice we tend to use a modal vibration over much more of our range functionally than women do in general. So as an opera singer, if you're an operatic bass, you are going to be solely in modal voice, in a modal vibration, whatever else you're doing. I think what was so interesting about discovering the modes of vibration, and it's creak or vocal fry, modal, falsetto and whistle. And obviously whistle is Mariah Carey land, and creak is just coming into the speaking voice all the time now, which is lovely.
Is it?
So mainly you sing in modal or falsetto, and the creak and the whistle tend to be additions, if you like.
So if we wanted to clarify that for an American audience, and actually for a lot of European audience, if we said M1 or M2, then they'd probably be happy with that particular statement.
Sure. Okay. Just to be aware, in Europe they're numbered differently, and in America it's M1, 2, 3 and 4, and in Europe it's M0, 1, 2 and 3, which is really confusing.
So confusing. No wonder nobody can agree or read anything.
I'm going with modal and falsetto. What I think is interesting about this is it is not, as far as I am aware, possible to mix a modal and a falsetto vibration. They are two entirely different vibrations where the vocal folds are behaving in different ways. Now, once you accept that, because that's a big one to accept.
Yeah.
Anything that you do, any mixes that you do, could be a mix on modal and a mix on falsetto. Can't have both, but you can have either. So when people talk about the mix, my first question is, what are you mixing on? What are your vocal folds actually doing? Because you could do a light modal mix, you could do a twangy modal mix, you could do a bright modal mix, you could do a breathy modal mix. And then you can do all of those things on a falsetto. So which is why when we did one of our webinars, we came up with head voice 1 and head voice 2.
Oh, I see.
We just thought it was the best way to deal with it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And the interesting thing is, I think this is why it's one of those, and we've had this with the teachers that we train, it takes them a bit of time to get their head around the idea of a head voice 1 and a head voice 2, because the underlying vocal fold vibration's different. Once they start to find it themselves and they start to hear it, it makes life so much easier. The really fascinating thing about the vibration is, in a modal vibration, you've got the thyroarytenoid muscle active. It's there. Whatever else you're doing with it, the TA is active. In a falsetto vibration...
And the vertical phase difference.
The vertical phase difference is there. In a falsetto vibration, TA is lax. It's not happening. It's relaxed. It's let go. And therefore, you don't have the vertical phase difference. What this actually means is that if you're in a modal vibration of any kind, you can change things at vocal fold level. You can make the vertical phase difference slightly smaller. You can
engage the CT.
You can play with the muscle and what it does. In a falsetto, you can't play with the muscle because it's not active. Therefore, you're starting to play with all of the resonating things above it. That's what causes all the changes. Now, you can play with resonating changes above a modal as well, but you have an extra thing in the equation. The difficulty comes with classical singers, particularly female classical singers, who have been taught to sing with a falsetto vibration. And that's perfectly okay. And they're using all of these supraglottal resistance things. So they're using a backed tongue, they're using more twang, they're using whatever they're using. They're using vowel shapes, they're using raised soft palate.
So they're using a downstream force as well as the upstream force. And that's enabling the vocal folds to stay closed for longer.
And that's, to simplify that for the listeners, that's airflow and resonance reflecting or feeding back to the vocal folds, both at which provide that singer, female singer, with more body in the sound.
Absolutely,
yes.
Absolutely.
Because the body isn't in the sound from the vocal fold. Where it gets fascinating is when you get classically trained female singers going into pop, rock, R&B, musical theatre particularly, where a lot of musical theatre is based on a modal of some kind, a thinned modal, a bright modal, whatever you want to do. They are still using all the resonating things that they have used on their falsetto to bulk the sound up, and then they add vocal fold, and they overdo it. So that's why you get classical singers who say you can't take chest voice above E above middle C. They're quite right, they can't. Musical theatre singers who are used to working on a modal vibration can take chest voice up to C,
C5,
above middle
D5,
C, D5, E5, F5. We've had people going up to G sharp 5 in a modal, and then you get the gospel belters. So that was one of the biggest things for me, is the idea that once you start knowing what's going on at vocal fold level, you start to understand that the resonating things that you're using in falsetto cannot work on modal. You have to adjust.
Okay, right.
I want to chip in here, actually. One thing is to say, this is our thinking at this point in time.
Hey, we're going to change it tomorrow.
No, obviously it's from what we've learned from voice research studies, and from what we've learned by putting it into practice and finding that it works. I think that there is more conversation to be had about registers, because in the past, almost all register theory was predicated on the male model. And I think until we look more into female voice, particularly female voice singing in non-classical music genres, we won't find out that more. I mean, it is starting to happen now. But I think that was one of the big things about the sort of the chest falsetto divide that I suspect caused a bit of a political issue amongst the singing community in the US, which was that it was really based on male voice. and that's my opinion. There's more conversation to be had. I think we do not yet know some things, and that's okay. But this is how we apply it in our practice. When we're looking at, what are we analysing? We're analysing breath use. We're analysing vocal fold function. We're analysing pattern of register. We're analysing the shape of the resonator. We're analysing how someone uses their articulators. Those are the things that we're looking for in terms of vocal function and how those pan out.
Putting it into practice, one of my favourite things to do in a session is when somebody comes in and says, I've got 4 recordings of 4 different artists, I need to be able to sing all of these songs, I'm in a cover band, how do I make these sounds? How do I sound like this person? And I'm going, great, play the recording, let's analyse what they're doing now, let's put it onto your voice and find out what your voice can do and what your voice capabilities are, doing those stylistic things and those basic sounds. You are not going to sound like a carbon copy, but you're going to sound like your version doing this style or making these sounds. One of my favourite things to do. That combination of analysis and putting it into practice.
And there's something here that I want to add to that, which is the idea, because there are some training systems that use sound templates. The Estill system is one. I think that the complete vocal technique is another. They're very similar in that way. And the sound templates are really useful because they give you something that you can just play with and have fun with. But if what you do is you have a rigid attitude to how that sound template is produced, and you then map that onto the student, instead of mapping the student's voice to that template, you're in trouble. Because there are so many variables in the vocal tract that if we cannot assume that the sound output comes from just one set of movements. There are loads of others. An example would be producing an edgy sound, which I understand from Jeannie Lavetrie is much more used in the US than twang. But say we were talking about a twangy sound, something like that, that could easily be produced by someone who has an overriding A position, such as someone in Glasgow, a Scottish person, will actually speak with what we perceive to be a shed load of twang. Actually, because of their, how would we call it, sort of their vowel colour, their overriding vowel colour, which might affect laryngeal position, without even consciously twanging. So that would be an example of 2 different inputs to make a perceptually similar sound outcome.
And then you have the whole world to consider when it comes to accents and dialects and their actual equilibrium positions, even on the lips, like they can be more pursed or more open or susceptible to jaw tension, low larynxes, high larynxes, all that. So it's actually a minefield, isn't it, when you think about it, when you teach internationally,
I think.
Yes.
It's fun, because really that's when your diagnostic skills come in, which is what is your default position? What is it that you do when you're not thinking? What is it that you do when you're not singing? What's your default speaking position?
Yeah, and I think that's actually a really good segue into your app, actually.
Yeah.
Because the app, congratulations, by the way, it's been very successful on iTunes, released around about June time, sometime in the summer, but currently, as of this week, number 27 in the music app chart, but number 3 in the music paid app chart.
That's right.
That's correct? And it's a set of vocal warm-ups lasting 1 minute and actually focused a lot around the speaking voice. So despite the fact that this app would be very useful for singers, why, in your opinion, is it so focused on speaking voice?
Well, there are 2 things. First of all, it's a collaborative project. We were collaborating with a speech therapist and an app developer who are also a husband and wife team called Speech Tools. And it felt like a good place to start to look at healthy functioning of the voice. And after all, no matter how much we sing, 95% of our day is spent speaking. So everything that we're doing with our speaking voice is going to impact on singing voice. We've just been talking about how different habitual patterns can help or hinder a singer to produce certain sound qualities. So we felt this was the right place to start. And I have to say that for decades I have resisted, and you too, I did not want to make a generic warm-up.
And
CD or release one, even though people have begged me to, because my warm-ups are customised to the student.
yeah.
Honestly, the amount of emails we get saying, "What's the best warm-up?" And it's like, yeah, I know somebody's out there looking for ideas. It's not really a criticism on the person who's emailing, but it's just like when coaches get out there in the world, you realise it's so wide. It's so hard, isn't it, to distill? So what was your process coming up with the most universally useful set of exercises?
Okay, first of all, there are a load of 1-minute exercises, and each exercise focuses specifically on one technique. But what I think makes the app interesting, and it's why we still have not produced the generic warm-up, is that you can put those single exercises into combinations, into sequences. And somebody did the maths for me once, and I think there's 500,000 different sequences that you can do from the app.
You can imagine how
combinations.
excited.
Yes.
Wow, that's incredible.
So in the app, you can do up to 5 exercises in one combination, and you decide what you can do. You can repeat the exercises. So if you find that you're really not working well, your throat is very closed that day, you can do the opening throat exercise 3 times if you want to, or 5 times if you want to. It's 5 minutes of opening throat. So I'm still going that we haven't actually produced the generic warm-up. What we've done is produced an app that will allow you to produce the sequence that works best for you that day.
Right.
And it was based on those areas. We looked at, because it's an app and people are going to be using it in their car, we couldn't use things like some of the body balance exercises that we used in our children's books, the Singing Express. But we do have things that enable you to get in touch with your physicality, particularly, around the shoulder and the neck area, which is important. But we were looking at breath use, breath flow, and we were looking at throat tension, tongue tension, what people experience as tension.
And diction exercises.
Yeah, articulation exercise, because that's important, and learning to, just find a, dare I say it generic, but sort of, a mouth space that's going to allow you to articulate efficiently, rather than going for some of the resonance shapes that singers use for form and tuning. So we didn't need to do anything like that. What else is on the app?
There's a whole little section on...
pitch.
There's pitch, there's pace and volume. There's all sorts of things that are sort of more than just making sounds. They're actually putting them into practice, which you might have gathered by now is more my field.
Yes.
It's lovely that you can make the sounds. Congratulations. Now let's put them into practice and make them work for you.
Right. And would you be able to share some of your favourite exercises on that programme?
Yeah.
My favourite is the pitch one.
Oh, yeah.
Where we show how to achieve a pitch glide. If you start off with a very simple because almost everybody can do that. And then finding that you can move around a little bit in pitch. So, I'm not sure that's quite the sequence, but that's what it's based on. Yeah. And then we have So you begin to feel, I can go up to a high-ish pitch. I can go down to a lowish pitch.
So that would be more for maybe someone just starting out with their voice, would it? Or
yes,
right.
Very much so. Perhaps someone who needs to speak a little bit in public, or a teacher, so that they have some variation in their tonal quality. Because what often happens when people feel challenged by their voice is that they start to speak on a monotone, and they'll often push their voice down in pitch to try and protect it. Whereas actually what we need for a little bit of interest is to move the pitch around. So say they did something like that, and then I think, what have we got? I'd like a tea, please, not a coffee.
I'd like a tea, please, not a coffee.
I'm not sure I agree with that statement, but anyway, yeah, I'll go with it.
Trust me,
Value.
I'd like a tea.
In the UK, pitch is one of the ways that we create emphasis. US speakers apparently typically will use volume, but we use pitch variation.
And how did you arrive at that observation? Is that literally just over the years it struck you, or did you actually purposefully measure that?
Regretfully, I can't tell you where we read it, but it would have been a paper that we read about how people... It might even have been Paul Meyer's dialect
Possibly, yeah.
I think it's in Paul Meyer's dialect coaching, because he's a British guy who now works in America, done a fabulous series of dialect stuff, and I think he talks about in standard British speech there's more pitch variation. I hope I'm right about that.
Yeah, more aggression in American speakers. I think that's the
That's how we perceive it.
That's how we perceive it. But I think what's interesting is that they tend to have a slightly smaller pitch range, but they actually use volume and point more. And I think there's a beautiful example of an actor who has been successful in the UK and successful in the US. I don't think the series is still going, but Hugh Laurie played the Prince Regent in Blackadder, and that pitch range is over 2 octaves. It's extraordinary what he's doing. So that's a really quite exaggerated pitch range, and that's the character that he's playing. He then goes to America and plays House in 9 series, so obviously successful, and he is almost monotone. So the pitch range is minute in that, but he's using emphasis.
But he's pretty cool in that, though, isn't he? Apparently, I've never watched it. I don't know why I'm even getting involved in this conversation.
Yeah, he's very cool. He also uses quite a lot of fry.
Yeah.
Does he?
Yeah. Not
and
in
then
a
he sings
negative
blues
way,
too.
Yeah.
He sings blues, yeah.
And what would be your favourite exercise, Jeremy?
The diction exercise that we do is on consonants. And when people talk about emphasising words, what they tend to do is kick the consonants. There is another way of doing it, which is to extend the consonants. So you actually make the consonants slightly longer. So we came up with some phrases like fetch the chili cheese to show Sister Jean.
You came up with that?
Yes.
Yeah, all on your own. Because that is mental.
Can we please tell them about Harry Hole afterwards?
Harry Hole!
That was mine.
I don't think we've got time for that.
Do fetch the chili cheese.
If you think about fetch the chili cheese, and the reason that we did that is that these are fricatives. So you've got fricatives and affricates. Fetch the chili cheese to show Sister Jean. That would be emphasising the fricatives by volume. Fetch the chili cheese to show Sister Jean.
Whoa.
So
God.
That's quite assertive.
That was a strong reaction from Gilliane, just for the sake of knowing what's going on.
So by doing that, what I'm doing is I'm actually putting faster airflow behind the fricative, and I'm also, like the Fs and the CHs and the SHs, but I'm also biting slightly harder with the gap, it's the contact between, or near contact, between the teeth and the lip. Fetch the chili cheese to show Sister Jean, which is quite aggressive. What's interesting is that if you use the other way to do it, which is to extend the consonants but keep them the same volume, fetch the chili cheese to show Sister Jean.
Ooh, saucy.
We have got saucy, haven't we?
Now
I'm feeling rather good.
I'm stimulated.
And obviously I'm doing the exaggerated version, but what's interesting when you do the exaggerated version and then you back off a bit and you do it a little more easily, fetch the chili cheese to show Sister Jean, is very clear diction.
And what it does,
if you need that type of diction, that's a great exercise to do.
It raises awareness of where the point of articulation is without us having to go in. I mean, I think we do name the consonant type, but without us having to talk about, type, manner and placement.
Yeah.
Because people are just going to zone out. They're not going to do that in their cars.
We flash it up. The app actually is cartoons. So all of these 1-minute exercises are cartoons. I learned to draw for this app, which I'd never been able to draw before, and then I found a lovely little program that I could do it. So I've done all the videos on the cartoons on the app, and so everyone has either visuals of what you're doing or visuals of the words that you're saying or little facts that throw up as well. So we say that TCH is an affricate, for instance. And that's quite useful, and I think cartoons are basically international. I think that's what's so interesting, is that there's so much visual to camera stuff now on YouTube that you sort of blank out, because it's like, oh, they look nice. Oh, isn't that interesting? What's that stuff behind them? What books have they got on their bookshelf? Rather than paying attention to what's going on. I think what's nice about the cartoons, because they're so clear and they're so international, actually, that you start to pay attention to what's in the app, and also because they're only a minute long. The challenge for the app was actually getting the exercise with all its stuff into a minute.
Oh, I bet.
So that was fun. So what we have is you have a 3 or 4 minute tutorial that tells you what's happening, why the exercise is there, and exactly how to do it. And then we have the 1 minute just do it version.
Excellent. I mean, that's a perfect way to do it. Now, can I get my tin opener again? And bring a listener question to you, right? So the listener preferred to be anonymous.
This is from Jimmy Flanagan.
It was a girl, so we'll go with it. All right, Jimmy. What exactly is tilt?
Yeah.
And how can I access it properly? And we know like that's a still phrase. Might not be familiar with everyone, but you might see it on forums or Facebook or whatever. But if you could give us the simple version of what tilt might be considered, and then we can open it up as to what is it if someone hears it, and how might this person actually discern the information.
It's unfortunate in a way that this is not a live question, because I would have to ask a question straight back, which is, what do you mean by that?
Great. Then should we just wrap it up? Yeah, let's do it. Cool, nice.
I'm going to jump in.
Thank you.
With some gloves on.
Before you jump in, because this is actually a valid question, which is, you have obviously, this is about beliefs and what people are holding. You have an idea about what it might be, or you've been told that you don't have it and therefore you should have it. So I would still ask the question before answering anything, which is, what do you think it means, and why do you think you need it? Or why have you been told that you need it? Because this is not just about what the word means or what the technique might be, but what application precisely do you think you need it for?
Yeah, actually, I agree with that, because if the question had just been, what is tilt? What do you mean by it? But it's, how do I get more of it? Is that right?
Yes. Or how can I access it, I guess, yeah.
How can I access it? Yes. It is a term that is used quite widely in the UK, and if, like me, you're in a lot of groups where you interact with American colleagues, you will know that it's a term that's not much used in the US. In fact, I've had quite high-level American colleagues say, yeah, what's this thread about? What is it?
And you're like, don't worry about it, leave it. Ignore it all.
Exactly. So I think it's useful to sort of unpick what that means. Generally, my understanding is from the way that the Estill people approach it is it's something to do with the CT mechanism.
That's cricothyroid mechanism.
Yeah. Now, you can see in some parts of the literature, I seem to remember reading something that Ron Bacon wrote, a chapter for one of Satilov's books. I'm sorry, I've forgotten the name, but we can always slot it in later. Edited by Rob Satilov. That when the CT mechanism, the cricothyroid mechanism engages, it tilts the upper part of the larynx, the thyroid, forward, and you can actually see that diagram. I use that diagram in my after Estill speech. So that would be one example of what people might mean by tilt. They're engaging the CT mechanism to make a more CT dominant sound, stretching and elongating the vocal folds. Of course, the problem comes along when you read a lot of the other literature, which tells you exactly the same effect can be achieved by moving the cricoid upwards towards the thyroid. So then we have another movement that achieves exactly the same thing. So if you're going to talk to your student about tilting to elongate the vocal folds to access higher pitches more easily, you need to be able to explain to them, using a model of the larynx, look, you have these muscles called the CT muscles, and they will either bring the thyroid closer to the cricoid or the other way round, and you show them the model and you explain about an elastic band stretching, and you say, with this action you can thin and elongate your vocal folds for easier access to high pitch. And then you as the teacher need to be darned careful making sure that your student, if you're going to teach a move like that, knows which one he or she does.
Either of them are fine. Because there isn't one that's wrong and one that's right.
In fact, I move my cricoid to thyroid and not the other way around.
The whole point of this is that you're looking at muscle that goes from the thyroid cartilage, this is at the front and slightly to the sides, from the thyroid cartilage down to the cricoid cartilage. And it's actually a double-headed muscle, so it arises on the cricoid cartilage, and there's a muscle that goes upwards and there's a muscle that goes diagonally. What then happens is if that muscle contracts, the relationship between the thyroid and the cricoid cartilage will change. So the gap between them at the front will get smaller. Now, either the thyroid will tilt downwards or the cricoid will tilt upwards. It has exactly the same effect. So the gap at the front gets smaller. And both of those effects will stretch the vocal folds. And the reason that you want stretched vocal folds is because stretched vocal folds access high notes more easily. They vibrate faster. They can vibrate faster.
So it's nothing more than that. And it would be something that you would use in particular circumstances rather than being something that you would use in a held position throughout your vocal range, in my opinion.
Me too.
Because what we don't want is to have the vocal fold muscles at stretch all the time.
Yeah.
And is that what you find in your experiences, that tilt seems to be a wholesale application once one starts singing rather than a recipe for a movement instead?
Absolutely.
Yes.
Yes.
I mean, it's about pitch range. If we engage that cricothyroid mechanism, then the most likely outcome is that we will change pitch. If we disengage it, we will change pitch in a downward direction. Of course, there are neural things that go on, to make that happen as well. So if we're trying to hold it in position right the way across the range, that's actually not efficient vocally.
I mean, technically, if you think about holding a muscle stretched across your entire range, you are not going to hit your low notes. End of story. Because for low notes, that you need a vocal fold that is going to vibrate slower. Since the byproduct of tilting is to stretch the vocal fold to get them to vibrate faster, you're actually going to lose all your low notes. So therefore you need to, what we call, unhook the tilt.
Why
for low
stretch
notes.
the elastic band for the low notes?
Yeah.
Does not make sense to me at all.
Yeah.
There is some thinking, and this is not, I don't feel expert to talk about this, but in the UK now, from Janice Chapman's work, we're starting to think that what people mean by tilt for an overall sound outcome is actually to do with a resonating shape that is being held in the pharyngeal area.
Yes. So it's not to do with the vocal folds at all.
Yeah. And this can actually be seen, and it has been observed by Dane Chalfin in about 400 subjects. And that, I think, is where we need to go if we're looking for that overall sound quality that people want.
I mean, in essence, what we've just done is we've undone the question and we've not answered it.
Yeah.
Sorry about that.
Sorry, how do I access it?
Can we?
Goodness sake!
Maybe if I listen to it 6 times, I might figure something out.
But there's usually a common instruction, isn't there, for tilt amongst either teachers of a still or teachers that have adopted that terminology?
I'll tell you what I use. So in my everyday speaking voice at the moment, if I'm sort of in my kind of right-on voice, then I would say I'm not using much cricothyroid activity. But if I wanted to go to a higher pitch, and maybe I was having difficulty with that or eliciting it with the student, I would say, why don't you have a bit of a whinge or a moan? Because when we go, oh no, that's not fair, oh, ow, we usually raise the pitch, and the thinking at the moment is that will elicit this sort of tilted thyroid or cricoid position, so more CT dominant.
So adding a bit of whinge, adding a bit of moan is a mix.
Oh, I thought we'd put that one to bed, to be honest with you. But also, that voice quality you talk about, Gilliane, what throat shape is that holding for someone who might overuse that quality?
That is something I can't answer, because the overuse of tilting that I was talking about was about the CT mechanism.
Okay.
And the thinking is that with this sort of whinge, it's more about widening in the pharynx together with slightly longer, thinner vocal folds.
I can demonstrate for you. the sort of, I actually heard this in the West End. I heard somebody sing an entire role. I'm not going to name the show. I heard the entire role sung like this. So he actually maintained this shape that entire time, and then tried to get louder on it and higher, and then tried to belt on it, and then tried to get low, and it definitely doesn't work.
Right, because I mean that's so if that gentleman is going from speech quality to belt, they're inherently dynamic shapes and different shapes, right?
Yep.
But in his case, it was one shape for all. But what trouble could someone run into if they attempt the same thing?
Lose your voice. And what you've got is muscles at extreme stretch.
Vocal fatigue, because if muscles are at extreme stretch, what will happen is they lose their ability to relax. It's exactly the same as any muscle. If it's tensed and elongated all the time, it forgets how to relax, and then what happens is you actually lose its tensile capacity.
So would you say that all this said, that there's a need for this movement, and but not to overuse it, because there are other notes that people have to sing, but it's actually probably the biggest driver for a question like this is probably how would one instruct it? And in fact, do you have to instruct that movement when in fact, as we spoke about earlier on, it's a byproduct of efficient voice use?
I think to be honest, any situation, any physicality that you hold throughout is a bad idea. End of story. Doesn't matter what you're singing, it doesn't matter what style you're in. If you are holding something in a particular position the entire time, you have lost your flexibility. And actually what then happens is you're then having to pile other stuff on in order to make your singing work, because you are holding something solid. And in this case, the word solid is not a good idea. Flexibility is good.
I think my answer, and I apologise to your listener that we aren't giving her or him a definitive answer, is that I think that more discussion needs to be had about what this term actually means. If the movement of the cricothyroid mechanism needs to be better understood and what its purpose is, and whether we actually need to teach it in a conscious way, or whether, as someone like Janice Chapman would say, that by using the winch it's more of a primal sound, and that it elicits support and all of those things, that it's one of those pre-verbal sounds that we're actually programmed to do. So more discussion needs to be had about that, and the role of the lengtheners in the vocal folds, as opposed to or together with this shape. And I think that what this listener is looking for is some kind of a shape, and it may not be anything to do with using the CT mechanism.
Yep.
That's my guess.
And distill that however you like, listener. But it's actually very interesting and
good luck,
because the jury's out on it still. We need more explanation. Absolutely, yeah. And there's so many issues on singing that the same way.
Sometimes you have to be brave enough to say, I don't know all the answers. I can only ask the question.
Yes, great. Okay, thank you, guys. So we've got one last thing to talk about, and that is where you would like people to go and find out more about you, look at the stuff that you've created, and also find out more about your books and apps. Where would you like people to direct their attention on that front?
Vocalprocess.co.uk is the website. Funnily enough, I think the webinars are probably the place to go to. We have 18 webinars that are an hour long each. In which we have loads of visuals, we talk about techniques, we demonstrate them, we show you what the exercises are to do them. We've got 2 on speaking voice, we've got 2 on how we diagnose, and we've got 14 on different aspects of technique and performance.
3 troubleshooting webinars, which are great.
Yeah.
Also, we have a Vocal Process Facebook.
Before you go to the Facebook, store.vocalprocess.co.uk/webinars.
Right, the quick link, and I will put all of this in the blog post, supporting blog post as well.
Facebook.
Go to the Vocal Process Facebook. If you've heard us talk about something here that you're interested in, and you don't feel like trawling through a website, just message us.
Great.
That's true.
Okay, excellent.
And we'll point you, tell us what you're interested in, and we will point you, it's usually me that does this, directly towards something that is going to be of benefit to you. We do have lots of fun, free stuff as well.
We do, yeah. I mean, the thing is, because we've actually produced so much, people can get completely overwhelmed by looking at it, because it's 7 books, 18 webinars, 5 DVDs, a CD, and an app.
Wow.
Saying.
Yes. You've been quite productive, I have to say, and then obviously your individual teaching hours and workshops in person, that's quite a lot going on. So
and on Skype as well. I've done Skype masterclasses, which I've loved doing, because I love the idea of me on a 40-foot screen.
Yes, that'd be great for my ego, I think.
Not that you need anymore.
My God complex.
Don't need.
Can we give a little shout for the new course we've created?
Yes, the Musical Director's Vocal Technique Retreat.
Wow, that's very specific.
Yes.
Great. So Musical Director's Vocal Technique Retreat.
Yes.
I guess we don't really need to ask who that's for.
No.
Smashed it in the title there. That was the 2008 marketing course going on there.
Absolutely, yeah.
Yeah. And when and where is that happening?
It's actually happening. Well, the first run is happening in a fortnight, but it is going to go into our canon of courses.
Because we've
weekend
had
courses.
a lot of interest. I mean, some people can't make it, but we've had a lot of interest from people. I had an email yesterday saying, this is the course I've been waiting for years.
We had 400 hits on that page in the last 3 days.
Wow.
So people are really interested. And the interesting thing about that is musical directors are usually instrumentalists. They don't often have singing training. If they do have singing training, which is rare, that it will mostly have been classical. And then they're faced with We Will Rock You, or the
Book of
Mormon, which the classical training won't work for, but they are responsible for cast warm-ups every day.
Yes.
So we have a huge section on what is a warm-up, what are the exercises, what does that exercise actually do, what sequence should these exercises be put in, and basically the idea by the end of the weekend is that the musical directors will know what the exercises do, what the vocal techniques are, which order to do them in, and can change them around depending on the show they're MDing.
Awesome.
Oh, brilliant.
Sounds incredibly useful.
And you can, understandably so, because I know there's been a lot of MDs, what's the word, slagged off over the years.
What's the word? It was already in the barrel.
It was already there.
Just give me time. I need to give this bit more stature, this sentence here.
Had some aggression thrown their way because of the expectations put on singers over the years, and I think this is just brilliant for that.
Let's start a warm up with a 2.5 octave run. Right, good idea.
Don't do Bella Signora if you're going to sing the Book of Mormon.
Okay, Bella Signora, that's one of my pet hates, because I was an MD for years.
Do you guys know Bella Signora?
No, can we pick a more modern song? No, we're way off the classical. We get an Adele.
Let me just demonstrate Bella Signora. This is the exercise that is used a lot in musical theatre warm-ups. Bella Signora.
Beautiful, resonant. I think you might have peaked it. Actually, that was lovely. So that's a real common one on stepping up and down.
I love it.
Now,
I absolutely love it.
When you analyse that, first of all, I'm singing classically. Secondly, that's classical runs. Those are classical scales, which are absolutely no use for a pop musical, because pop is mainly based on pentatonic stuff. Thirdly, it's very, very legato, very smooth. And fourthly, it's sung in Italian. I can only think of one show where that warm-up would actually be useful, and that is...
To Phantom of the Opera and Light on the Piazza.
Light in the Piazza, which actually contains a singer who sings in Italian opera. Thank you, I'll buy that one. And I'll buy Phantom of the Opera for the same reason. But I won't buy it for anything else. The patterns are wrong, the sounds are wrong, the vowels are wrong. It's just that, what possible use is that going to be to sing Bear?
Right. Yeah, exactly. And that's where this course comes in, really helpful. So it's happening in 2 weeks' time.
Yes.
Chances are, if people keep up with your Facebook page and on your website, they'll see recurring occurrences of this course. Reminders, yes. So please do sign up to that. So thank you both for joining us. Incredibly interesting. We urge everyone to get in touch with you if they have any questions, or please do email us at info@thenakedvocalist.com if you would prefer to get in touch with us to forward the questions. Thank you, guys.
Welcome back, listeners. Hope you found that enjoyable, informative, somewhat controversial at times. But that's what we're about. We're about impartialism. That's the deal. That's the deal at this HQ, babes. As mentioned in the podcast there at the end by Jeremy, there are a whole bunch of webinars that help all kinds of different things, from diagnosing voices for teachers to any part of vocal anatomy and teaching and singing, all told, at vocalprocess.co.uk. If you wish to purchase any of those webinars, again, we don't financially benefit from this, but Gilliane and Jeremy did offer us 40% discount to Naked Vocalist listeners and readers. So if you would like to take advantage of that, then if you go and buy one of those webinars on their website, enter the code Naked Vocalist as one word, Naked Vocalist as one word. And you will get 40% discount on those webinars. There will be show notes to this episode on thenakedvocalist.com. So anything that you missed out, including details on their warm-up app and everything else that's in the episode, get yourself along to the Naked Vocalist, go into the podcast section, and there you'll see Vocal Process, Gilliane and Jeremy there to read through as well. What are you up to today, mate? What you got going on?
Well, for one thing, I would just say I'm going to. In answer to your question, I'm actually teaching today, which is a surprise. What am I likely to be doing of a day? Teaching. Yep.
Teaching, and then filling in the gaps with tears.
No, do you know what I'm going to be filling the gaps with? Perusing the Naked Vocalist Facebook group.
Perusing it, what for? What are you hoping to get out of it?
Well, this is the thing. In all jokes aside, let's be real. I don't contribute that much in there at the moment. However, I still do read it. But I just find it. I'm struggling to find the time to write at the moment in there. But the reason why I bring it up is because anybody listening to this podcast out there at the moment that it wants a little bit of impartialnessism in singing, and is on their Facebook, and you've just got Lad Bible in your feed, and maybe a little bit of I don't know,
funny animals. But you want a little bit of singing stuff. There is a lovely vibe, lovely bunch of people in there. We don't accept idiots. No, they do get told.
Yeah. Then get stuck in the Naked Vocalist community.
Yes. The link. If in case you want it, facebook.com/groups/TNV community. But yeah, I'm sure if you search it, you'll also find it as well.
What are you doing today?
I'm going to actually get my workshop together for the Voice Teacher Forum. That's in April, which I mentioned at the start of the episode. So I'm having a little roundup about that.
That's good prep. That's how many weeks are we out?
Oh, I don't know. Probably 6 or 8.
Yeah, I'll probably start mine in 6 weeks' time.
That's classic. That is classic. But no, I think I've been thinking about it for a while. And I just want to get my thoughts down on paper because, it's kind of the direction is clear. Quite often you're thinking, right, what would be valuable? But I've been wanting to deliver this subject for a while and just actually looking for an opportunity. So this one coming along means I'm actually unusually more prepared because I've thought so much about it. So I'll be doing that. But it's snowing here, Steve. In my gaff. So, as what happens with about 0.3 millimeters of snow in the UK, nobody can go anywhere.
Stand still.
So standstill, yeah, exactly. So I might just slip and slide down the high street to go and get. I basically just need
chocolate.
No electric brush tooth heads, electric toothbrush heads.
Okay, mate. Well, you have a good day.
Yeah, are we for anybody who's still mental enough to still be listening. Sorry, I mean, I definitely just click the button. Just click those two lines that say pause and just walk away.
Stop now.
Yeah, but have a great one, Steve, and everybody else. Goodbye, everyone. Have a lovely day.
The Naked Vocalist Podcast with Chris Johnson and Steve Giles.